We will deal with very serious issues and choose a candidate next week to carry our message to all of South Central Wisconsin. The beginning of the turnaround in Wisconsin begins here tonight. Our master of ceremonies tonight is local and state leader and talk show host, Brian Schimming. Brian?
How we doing, everybody? I can't hear you. So Senator Bradley just pointed out that maybe we should do the Pledge of Allegiance. We like that idea? All right, if everyone will stand. There we go. And I think you should lead us. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. There you go, baby. All right, people. Primary is a week from tonight. The primary is a week from tonight, and if you do your job, and you do your job, and you do your job, and you do your job, 98 days from tonight, Tony Evers will be out of a job. We're taking this opportunity to pull our two candidates for Congress here in the 2nd Congressional District together so we can ask them questions, get to meet them if you have not had the opportunity to meet them. And so this is a unique opportunity. We're excited about the crowd. We're also on Facebook Live tonight, so we'll be Facebook Living this for people who are unable to make it. It's a great opportunity to pull us all together, and we're excited to have all of you here tonight. We appreciate you coming. First of all, let me introduce the panel. We're waiting for one panelist yet, but I will introduce the panel that I know, two of the three people on the panel that I know that are here. One of them is the former director of the Department of Social Services in California, and under Governor Walker, the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families. Please welcome Secretary Eloise Anderson. And a lot of you know this next person because he has run statewide and did a terrific job, has chaired the state Republican convention. In fact, he and I, because we've both done it, we have our own Wisconsin Association of Used Convention Chairmen, of which he and I are the co-members and co-officers. He is now a first-term member of the Wisconsin State Senate. Please welcome Senator Julian Bradley. Yeah. Enough about me. What do you think of me? No. Now let me introduce our two candidates for Congress here in the 2nd Congressional District. Please welcome Charity Berry. Our second candidate in our primary here in the 2nd Congressional District, please welcome Eric Olson. Here's how this is going to work, and the rules actually are very simple. Each one of our panelists have a number of questions to answer or to ask candidates. All the questions that we either have prepared or will come from the audience. And there's a place to drop off where's the wave tire over there. If you want to drop off a question, we ask if you do submit a question to do one that both candidates can answer, of course, because we'd like to have, we'd like to hear from both candidates on every question. So we will use a couple of those questions towards the end of the panel when we have an opportunity to ask things that are beyond what was previously prepared. Each one of the questions that is asked of the candidates, each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question, and we will go back and forth between the two candidates on who answers first and who answers second. As I say, a good 2-minute time limit, and we know how to enforce those. At state convention, we were like cutting people off when they got to the end. So we want to make sure and use their time correctly and use your time as well. The first question will be asked by Secretary Anderson.
Are you ready? Okay. Wisconsin administers SNAP, Medicaid, and SSI programs which have minimal requirements. As a member of Congress, what requirements, if any, would you seek and why?
Honestly, I had a hard time hearing the question. Could you repeat it?
Okay. I thought I had it close. Wisconsin administers SNAP, Medicaid, and SSI programs, which have minimal requirements. As a member of Congress, what requirements, if any, would you seek and why?
That is a question that has come several times in relating to the Social Security and Medicaid issues. Social Security especially is a very, can you hear me now? A very complex issue, and to give a full answer, I'm not afraid to say that I don't necessarily have the entire thing worked out. I have individuals that I've been touching base with and talking with, and we are trying to find every aspect of that to make wise decisions that work for the people and are sustainable in our country. The priority is to be able to take care of the American people in a way and keep the government in the realm that it is supposed to be in, and that is the backing for every decision that needs to be made in Congress, is making sure that the federal government stays where it needs to stay, especially relating to states' rights, and to and to be sustainable and follow the founding principles of our country.
Well, we have to always make sure that the least capable among us are taken care of. As President Trump often said in his speeches, we cannot have any American sick or dying in the street. We have to make sure that people are taken care of. That being said, the more complex that these projects become, and the more the federal government intrudes into them, we often find waste occurring, and we find that there are complicated and sometimes incredibly expensive programs when we could have simpler and more cost-effective programs. We had, and I think we still to some degree have, a tremendous program here in Wisconsin called Badger Care. I think that a lot of times the states, when they're left to their own devices, are able to fill that gap and fill it in a very good way to make sure that everybody is taken care of. I would be for generally scaling back the federal government. If I were to be in Congress, you would find that every single vote that I would take would be a vote, when possible, in favor of reducing federal intervention and scaling back the federal government, because I think that states are close to the grassroots for political purposes and are capable of responding quickly to the needs of the electorate in each given area. That being said, we do have to make sure, as the federal government, that we make sure that there are minimums at all times. If there has to be some level of oversight to make sure that if people are not getting taken care of, like Medicaid, for example, that care occurs. So if I understood the question correctly, the requirement was to what extent would it be generally available to everybody, right? I think it would be for those who need it, we have to make sure they have it, otherwise leave it to the states.
I want to ask folks, and they're both very clapworthy, but I want to ask folks to not generate your approval or disapproval so we can stay on time. But you can go crazy when we're done. So, Senator Bradley.
Thank you. So as we kicked off here this evening, we began by standing and we pledged our allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. In the Pledge of Allegiance, we declared we are one nation under God. My question for both of you is, what position, what role does faith play in your decision making?
Well, in my decision making, faith is integral to every single thing that I do. There was, I believe there was a great philosopher by the name of Pascal who said that there is a God-shaped vacuum in everybody's heart. For me, through much of my life, I did not have a faith. About 20 years ago, I came to what became my faith, which is Buddhism. And it slowly grew in me and brought so much joy and so much solace that it literally directs, like a compass, every single decision I make and every action that I take. And this is thanks to wonderful, beautiful teachers. We have a great teacher whose name is Tae Dorje. His title is the Karmapa. And we have other beloved teachers. A wonderful Danish woman named Hanna Nudal was one of my great teachers. And there's many I could talk about. But for many, the Christian faith, for many, the Jewish faith, and perhaps other faiths, my mother's family was Jewish, and they came here fleeing brutal persecution in Eastern Europe. It wasn't good there even before the Second World War. They came here fleeing that. So in America, we're a diaspora, but the reason that we say one nation under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, the reason that was added in was to combat the influence of Marxism when it was on the rise. I don't know if you knew that, but that's how it happened. Marxism is the antithesis of religion. It's the antithesis of order. It corrodes everything that's true and certain and replaces it with uncertainty and doubt. And then it's no surprise that we see our streets running red with blood from crime like they are right now. We see our leaders incapable of making any sort of a decent or reasonable decision. And we see our education system, which has turned into a morass that people often, now when they found out what their kids were learning in school, they were disgusted. That has to stop. That's the role of faith in my life, and I hope that's the role of faith in the life of every American who wants it.
I'm very thankful to be born into a Christian nation. Our nation was founded on certain principles that guide our freedoms, that give us the liberties that we have, and those need to be upheld. As we, oftentimes, especially here in Dane County, you hear that phrase, separation of church and state. But the truth is that that phrase was coined to keep the government out of church. And freedom of religion is a vital biblical principle that I hold dear. The way that religion and Christianity affects how I make my decisions is my moral compass. I believe there is a right and there is a wrong. I believe in honesty and integrity. That is a faith that will keep me from becoming the political swamp creature, per se, that so many Americans are tired of. Because the truth is, when you don't have right and you don't have wrong, you can do whatever you want. So I am very thankful that I was born into a Christian nation and that those morals will guide my decision making, and that is something that you can trust in as well.
I just want to, before Secretary Anderson mentions this question, just try to restrain your clapping. We appreciate it and everything else, but it ends up taking away time from the candidates. So we want to do that. So, Madam Secretary.
When the economy is doing well and teenage males, minorities, and the poor become employed, crime declines. What policies would you seek that would support Wisconsin economy?
At the federal level, it all boils down to we need to stop spending money that we don't have. Our federal government has taken this idea that money fixes everything, and every time it tries to print more money or throw things, it creates more inflation. And then it sends us into this spiral. The policies, especially in this current political culture that we're in, that are going to support Wisconsin economy is reasonable government spending. We need to make sure that the politicians that we send to Congress know that they are handling your dollars and are using them wisely, making sure that we are bringing bringing jobs here, bringing energy independence back to America, making sure that we can produce the things we need if we ever were to face another pandemic here in the United States of America. And so the main reason, I mean, we're running against Mark Pocan here in November, and he is voted for every spending bill related to COVID. He has backed the Build Back Better Act that businesses have stood up and cried out against. I was just meeting with business owners before I came here, and his policies have destroyed our economy, have destroyed our business. We need to retire Mark Pocan and get reasonable spending practices back into Washington, D.C.
Well, when we look at some of the communities where we have the highest crime rates, where we see families that are having a tough time making ends meet, to your question, and where we have situations where there's hopelessness, a lot of times what we're really looking at there is the inexorable result of utterly failed and wrong-headed Democrat policies. We should never have sent our beautiful manufacturing overseas. We sent our manufacturing to countries that aren't even friendly to us. We sent our manufacturing and the good jobs off to places where they steal our secrets and use it to build themselves up to get strong, because their goal is to one day knock us down and take our place. And God forbid that ever happens, because they're not friendly people, believe me. Now, what we have to do is bring the manufacturing back. We have to bring the good jobs back to our own shores. The manufacturing of the chips that we use in our military equipment, the manufacturing of the medicines that can cure us, the manufacturing of everything. Our government made foolish decisions and allowed the supply chain to go far away overseas. Detroit used to be a wonderful place with a high rate of home ownership. Look at what happened there. We need to bring the manufacturing back to our shores, and Congress can encourage that to happen by using either tariffs or incentives for companies that are willing to bring their jobs home. The left is so hypocritical. They claim to be for working class people. They're not for working class people at all. They've stabbed working class Americans in the back so many times. So what Congress can do is incentivize bringing that important strategic industry back and making good jobs for everybody so we have a bright future and low crime.
Senator Bradley.
Thank you. The 2nd Congressional District, as you mentioned, is currently represented by Mark Pocan, who is as far to the left as you can get. This district is known as a deeply blue district. However, as conservatives, we look for our candidates to be strong on our issues. We want true representation. How will each of you balance the necessity of staying true to yourself while also trying to attract new voters? Because it will take independents and even some Democrats in order to send you to Congress.
Well, that's a very easy question for me, because what we have that is so wonderful and so great is a great thing called the truth. And the truth is that the left has become so extreme that most of their own people no longer relate to their ideas. How many people do you think actually think it's a good idea to defund the police and let crime run rampant? How many people do you actually think that it's a good idea to send the jobs of hardworking Americans overseas so that families don't have the great stable jobs that they need to have a bright future and send their kids on to a good future? How many people on the left do you think actually believe that the government should mandate what can be shot into your body, into your arm, based on some supposition of some highly overpaid doctor someplace? I'll tell you, not many. So we have to start pointing out the truth, and we have to not be shy about it. So many times as conservatives, we're shy and we don't want to be bold with our ideas. So we have to be bold. We have to stand by the truth and not be afraid to say it to everybody. But we also have to do it in a very reasonable way. We have to have strength with kindness, strength with compassion in our speech and in the way we act. And when we do that, we'll inexorably start to pull people over to our side because they understand the truth. There's many people on the left, they're not even on the left. They agree with us on so many things. They want to help working families. They want to make sure that working families who work hard can make ends meet. They want to make sure that people can pay their mortgages and their school. They agree with us. We just have to show them that we are correct.
So how do we beat Mark Pocan in District 2? I've heard it all. It's an uphill climb. It's a David and Goliath. Well, good luck, sweetie. But the truth is, we can and we will, because a lot of his voters don't even know who he is. As you stated, he is as far left as left can be. I had a team at the Dane County Dairy Breakfast that pointed out the fact when asked that he co-chaired the Progressive Caucus, and multiple families turned around in shock. We thought he was a moderate. We thought Mark Pocan was middle of the road. How to balance that out with standing up for my values? The majority of Americans believe in that flag. The majority of Americans here in District 2 want a sustainable economy for their kids and grandkids. The majority of Americans, even here in District 2, want their kids to learn to read and write and do math in school and learn politics at home. The majority of Americans want real, patriotic, common sense representation. So how do we get that to them? We work hard. I've been working for a year. We've been in over a dozen parades. We've knocked numerous doors. We've sent out mailers. You'll see an interesting piece of literature on your table asking the question, would JFK vote for Mark Pocan? The answer is a resounding no, and that's what the people of District 2 need to hear. That Mark Pocan does not represent core values of the worker, of the family, of the grandparent, of the child, anyone. He represents coastal elitist fringe, and the policies he's bringing back to District 2 have failed, and they do not work for the people of this district. So we get out and we talk to the voters, as I have been doing for a year.
Secretary Anderson.
This question comes from one of the people in the audience, John Chart from Dane County. What will you do to bring back election integrity back to Wisconsin?
Election integrity has been a topic, has been the top of the list among voters that I have talked to from the beginning of my campaign. One of the biggest things that we can do in Congress is vote against this ridiculous attempt to federalize our elections. The people of Wisconsin know better how to run the elections than Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi. And so we need to fight against the attempts like H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 that Mark Pocan supports, making it illegal for states to enforce or to have laws to, to mandate voter ID. And it makes states allow for ballot harvesting and things like drop boxes. those kind of bills from the federal government are completely unacceptable, and it is unconstitutional. Some people say that as a congressional candidate, that's where the authority would stop. But the truth is, back from 2016 and even before, we have Al Gore in 2000. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said the election was stolen. So it's not just Republicans that have concerns about the vulnerability of our elections. So from the federal level, in each and every federal election, we can ask the states to do a state-run audit to prove that they followed their own laws. Hold the states accountable to their own legislatures so that we don't have the issues like we had here in Wisconsin in 2020. Make sure that things are done right. Hold the states each accountable to their own rules that when they're voting in elections that affect the entire country. We need to have fair, we need to have free, and we need to have secure elections to have truly representative government.
Well, there's nothing sadder than when people put in an enormous amount of effort in a political campaign, and people put their hearts on the line, and people put sometimes their money and even their reputations on the line, and then they feel like it wasn't handled fairly. We were over, we and all my great volunteers like John and Tina and Dennis and Sarah were over at the Greene County Fair last week or the week before, and after meeting with a lot of voters and talking to a lot of people, many of whom were concerned about it, and many of whom asked about that specifically, we went out to dinner. And when we were going out to dinner, Dennis had one of my flyers, and he walked up to a man and said, "Would you be interested in hearing about Eric Olson? He's running for Congress." And the man looked at him, and he was a nice-looking, nicely dressed guy, looked like a good man. And he looked at Dennis and he said, I voted once in my life, and it didn't count. And Dennis looked at him and said, 2020. And I was sitting there and I overheard it. And the man said, yeah. And he walked down the street. And that's a shame. That breaks my heart, because we have to make sure that everybody understands that it was fair and knows that it was fair. And in order for everybody to know that it's fair, it has to be fair. It has to be exactly right. Every time that an honest vote doesn't count, or any time that a dishonest vote is counted, liberty itself is violated. It's violated because the underpinning of our whole process is that the people are the rulers and they decide. So I would say, until full confidence is restored, we need paper ballots, hand counts, and in-person voting. Paper ballots, hand counts, and in-person voting.
Senator Bradley.
This question comes from Scott Frostman in Sauk. What's your take on Nancy Pelosi and Taiwan, and can you discuss the relationship with China?
Yes. Now that's a good one. That's a good one, because we are in the midst of a war, folks. We are. I hate to say it. It's undeclared, but the CCP, the Communist Party of China, wants to take our place, and they're doing everything that they can to do it. So we need to, first of all, realize that, because it's not a shooting war, it's not a kinetic war as it's sometimes said, but nevertheless they're stealing our intellectual property, they're trying to degrade our leadership in the world, and I think when we look back from the vantage point of the future in history, we're going to find out that they were doing an awful lot of things to undermine us in this country. That many of the reasons that we are so polarized and sometimes so at each other's throats may have had a little bit of gasoline thrown on the fire from overseas. We'll see. I may be right, I may be wrong. I think I'm probably right. So with Nancy Pelosi, I do think that we need to show support for Taiwan. Taiwan is a beautiful place. Look at how they handled COVID. Look at the level of freedom that they have there. Look at the brilliant things that they make, their manufacturing, and they stand there firm on their island, standing up to a great, overpowering, you might even say evil country to their west. and they stand firm there. So we have to show them support. But when it is very close to a midterm election, skeptical minds start wondering, why now? Why at this exact time? Why wasn't there a lot more support a lot earlier? So I don't want to ever undercut any support for the great Taiwan, but by the same token, it has to be consistent, not just at election time.
China understands one thing, and that is strength. So to combat China, we need to remain a strong global power. Mark Pocan has put forth an amendment every time the defense budget comes in to undercut it. He does not understand or does not care about the value of providing for the constitutional value of providing for the common defense. We need a strong military presence that does not succumb to the woke agenda. But our strength does not only lie in our military. We also need a strong economy to be able to withstand anything that may come from China. We also need a strong education system. When people talk about China, their mind immediately goes to communism. And that is a large threat even here on our own shores at this time. And our education system needs to root out all of the Marxism that is being taught and put forth to our children to be able, people like Stalin, people like Lenin always said, give me your kids for 4 years and I'll take the whole generation. We are allowing that to happen. So to combat China, we need to have strong military, strong economy, a united people, indivisible, as we said in the pledge. And we cannot let our children and our grandchildren undergo the socialist indoctrination that is being put on them by the public schools.
Before we continue, I want to welcome Jesse Garza to the stage. Jesse is a former district director for Congressman Sean Duffy, and he's also a state strategist at Majority Strategies, covering the states of Wisconsin and Minnesota, home of the Vikings, who suck. That you can clap for. Jesse, if you want to start, or if somebody else has got their next question over, Secretary Anderson.
Okay. It seems that students who spend their K through 12 education in choice schools have far less contact with the criminal justice system than their peers in government-run schools. Given this, what policies would you seek that do not violate the 10th Amendment?
In 1976, Jimmy Carter was running for president. He was the first president ever to be endorsed by teachers' unions. And in 1979, we were blessed with the Federal Department of Education. Our kids have been being failed in the public school system. The one-size-fits-all federalized mentality does not work. They use their purse strings of the Department of Education to manipulate and enforce destructive policies, social justice, they call it social emotional learning, implementing critical race theory, critical gender theory. If Mark Pocan gets his way, even all the way down to our preschools. This goes back to one of the questions by Senator Bradley. The majority of Americans, even in District 2, do not want their 3- and 4-year-olds exposed to sexualized, racist content in the classroom. That being said, the families, the kids, will do better if they are free, not federalized. In the meantime, though, we need to use the money that comes from the Department of Education to not incentivize social programs and transgender bathrooms with the threat of losing school lunches if they don't comply. as Biden has done recently. But we need to incentivize academic results that prove that our kids are being taught what they need to know. And we need to try to implement trade or apprenticeship programs into our high schools, because you know what? It's not just the soccer moms that are concerned with what is going on in our education system. I have met with the Wisconsin Manufacturers of Commerce and the Restaurant Association. Kids aren't ready for the workforce, and that needs to change.
So we have a problem in this country with education. We also have a problem with the criminal justice system and with a prison system that is broken and useless beyond belief. That's a lot to cover in a short amount of time, but we're talking about a federal office here, and one thing that we can surely do, if we can, which would be very important, would be to disentangle the federal government from education. The federal government may give money to schools, but it should not be dictating policy in schools. It should leave it simply at a generalized giving of funds. Schools should be administered at the local level. We have a long tradition of that. I grew up here in Madison, Wisconsin. I went to a beautiful public school. We had notebooks, textbooks, teachers, pencils. It was not expensive, and I think I got a great education, and at that time, it was politically neutral. So the one thing that the federal government might do, and this is actually probably available under the Constitution, is say that it does have to be politically neutral and in the classroom. Because if it's not politically neutral in the classroom, what we have is what's happening right now, where schools are teaching really a sort of a Marxist or neo-Marxist agenda. And that is slowly and inexorably degrading our ability to resist it. It's degrading the very fabric of our country, because Marxism is opposed to a constitutional system of rights. So we have to get that out of the classroom, and the federal government is simply going to have to step back and leave that up to the states to do, because at the local level is where education belongs. When we do that, and when we allow for good schools, and when we allow people to choose the school they want to send their kids to, I believe you'll slowly start to see schools improving in all areas. But that's a big question for a short time.
We appreciate being able to have Jesse here tonight, because number one, he gets the award for having driven the farthest, because he came clear from Hudson, Wisconsin, people. So let's hear it for Jesse for getting the... But secondly, because he worked for Sean Duffy. And what did Sean Duffy do? Sean Duffy got rid of Dave Obey out of Wisconsin's congressional delegation in a district that had been Democrat for, what, 30 years, Jesse? 42 years of Dave Obey. Now, 2 years of Dave Obey is bad enough, much less 42 years. So he's got special perspective as well, because he's been part of a huge effort to turn the area north of 29 more red. Jesse.
Thank you, Brian. In fact, that leads perfectly into my question I was going to ask. So I served for a member, Sean Duffy, who beat a 42-year incumbent, Dave Obey, which was no easy feat. During that, leading up to that election, people told him, you can't win, you can't win. Well, he proved them wrong. So that's why you're here today, right? Is to prove the naysayers wrong. So we look to the general election for either one of you. What do you see that is your quality, or what are you bringing to the table for the general election voter that says they should take a chance on you in a very similar political environment as we saw in 2010?
Well, I grew up here in Madison, Wisconsin. I went to UW-Madison. I studied anthropology. I went to law school at UW-Madison, and I also got a master's degree in cultural anthropology. Then I started a small law firm and spent the last 17 years primarily practicing land rights law, helping people throughout the state protect their property rights from, unfortunately, what we sometimes see, which is government overreach. And believe me, it happens. It happens more than you might think. But during that time, I also had some involvement in many facets of the legal system, including, to a small extent, the criminal justice system and many other things that you see as a corollary to practicing in a heavy litigation practice. We've gone to the Supreme Court, to the Court of Appeals many times. And so bringing all that knowledge of the law, of how the law works, of how laws actually work in practice once they're written and enacted, this gives a very, I think, a sort of a background. I've never been in government. And maybe that's even a benefit in this environment, I don't know. I certainly can't say that I have more experience in government than the incumbent, but I surely have more experience fighting government than anybody else in this room. And that's something that I am very proud of. And we were recently at an event where Senator Johnson was there. It was a fundraiser for him, and I support him. He's an amazing man. The work that he's done has been priceless to our country. And what he said was, I am a consistent vote for shrinking and repealing the federal government. And that's what I would be, a rock-solid, consistent vote for shrinking and repealing federal legislation and the size of the federal government. So if people are ready for that, if people want that, and I think they are, then that's what they would get with Eric Olson.
Americans across the district that I have talked to, doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, and Independent alike, as I've alluded to before. I've been running this race for 15 months now, and I have talked to thousands upon thousands of voters. They are sick and tired of career politicians that are out of touch with what actually are the results of the policies they push in Congress. I come from a small business background. I learned good, solid American work ethic with a chainsaw in my hands. I know what it means to get paid by the job and not by the hour. I can bring that hard work, that knowledge. After I was working in my family's small business, I was pursuing an apprenticeship that got hit hard by COVID. I know what it is to bear the brunt of bad government policy. And that drives me forward in making sure that what the policies that go on in our federal government work for the people, don't just look good for the politicians. People in this district, even in this county, are sick and tired of virtue signaling, out of touch politicians. They all are. My yard signs are in Democrat yards because they are tired of what Mark Pocan represents, because it's not them.
Senator Brett.
During the last question, you talked about things that you would repeal if elected to Congress. And we have a question from Susan from Dane County, who has a couple of them that she would like your opinion on. So the question is, will you repeal the PrEP Act, the CARES Act, the WHO, and the 1986 Vaccine Act?
I think a lot of why we slide to the left as a culture is because a lot of even Republicans get into office and they vote correctly on the bills that are in front of them now, but they don't necessarily go back and correct problems that have been made in the past. That is something that I have been talking about throughout my entire campaign. Our people in Congress, our representatives, need to not only consider the bills that come at them on a day-to-day basis, but consider the wrongs that have already been done and the government overreach that has already been attained. So forgive me if I don't remember everything that was listed, but I can answer it in a general way, in that we need to be sure that absolutely everything that is in the law of our government follows the principles that our nation was founded on, does not encroach on our freedoms, does not threaten our sovereignty as a nation, and does not threaten the individual rights of the people, their God-given rights to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
Well, so anytime that we're talking about a law, and who was it who asked that question? Are they there? That's a tough one, right? Because that was you. Okay, thank you. That's a tough question, because every piece of legislation, some legislation is very simple. And jokingly, I often say that we would do well to have a rule that every bill can only be 3 pages long or something like that, because they end up being so long and complex and interlocking and interwoven with other things that when we start talking about repealing them, the first thing that a responsible legislature has to do is study the bill in depth and then seek guidance and counsel from others as to what it would mean to repeal the whole thing. So, as a knee-jerk reaction, it sounds like a good idea to repeal the Vaccine Act, and maybe it is. I don't know, because I haven't studied it in depth. In addition to doing this campaign, I work and I handle cases and I do a lot of things. So that job is something that has to be done with the greatest of care. The WHO, I think you mean the World Health Organization, is that? Okay, my understanding is that that is something that would not be repealed so much as we might withdraw from it. And, okay, and she's nodding. And that is something that I would be very strongly in favor of, even though that I might catch some flack for that. But when we look at the leadership of that organization, the leadership is very partial to China, which I've already spoken about, which is not an ally of ours. So does it make sense for us to be involved in international and multinational organizations? Yes, of course it does. We want to be a responsible partner in the world. We want to be part of a world that works, that brings liberty and great things to everybody. But we cannot continue to be involved in organizations where our country and our voters are taken advantage of again and again. It's not smart, and I would get out of those.
Secretary Anderson.
Okay. Republicans used, oh, this is from a person in the audience, Curtis Bach from McFarland. Republicans used to care about fiscal responsibility. What, if anything, would you do to deal with crushing debt?
I don't understand the question. To deal with
Crushing debt.
Oh, well, we are crushed by debt. I don't know what else to say about it. We have 30-some trillion of debt. We are literally, we're on the verge of spending ourselves into oblivion. So we have to cut spending. It's going to be painful, but we have to find ways to do it. And we have to do other things to grow also. We have to bring back our industries to the United States, like I was talking about earlier. Every time we bring back a big chip manufacturing plant, or a plant that makes medication, that brings jobs, and that brings money, and that brings taxes. It may be, it's funny when I talk to people who are on the left, who are liberal, and you say, why have we shipped all of our wonderful, solid, great manufacturing jobs overseas? And they get a blank look on their face, and they look at you and they say, those jobs aren't coming back, as though it's some kind of a talking point. We can bring those jobs back if we all get together and decide that the jobs need to come back. And then we also have to spend less. It's very difficult to cut government. It's very difficult to cut programs once they're in place. It's difficult to do it. But we have to do it because we need to get that debt down to a safe level, and we need to grow. And when I say safe, I mean safe because we can literally spend ourselves into oblivion. We can get to a point where the debt is unpayable. And if the United States defaults, it loses a lot of its credibility. And so I am 100% for reducing the debt. We may need to look at drastic cuts in certain departments. But one thing that I would never reduce is the military. I would never reduce the military. Because we have to be strong. We have to be stronger than everybody else out there. Because sometimes people say that our rights come from God, and that may be true, but they are defended through our strength.
Every Republican says it. We need to stop spending money we don't have. When this inflation comes and hits us, the spiral effect of inflation is that it raises the interest rates. We've heard a lot about that this week. When we raise those interest rates, then we are paying more tax dollars into debt. as far as, or we are paying more tax dollars not into the debt through the interest rates. And so you mentioned that most Republicans are for fiscal responsibility or have been. It is all a spiral and this circular issue that just keeps coming and keeps coming because of the reckless spending. There are many ways that we can cut our spending in government. A lot of departments, they talk about the fraud that they deal with, but it has been proven in several areas that hiring a few people to combat the fraud would save so much more money than letting the fraud slip by. So many people. And that does not mean giving the IRS 80, however many billion dollars to hire the people they want to completely unaccountable. But just to, in all the different departments, there's Medicare fraud, there's VA fraud, there's all sorts of different areas where it would be more cost effective to make sure that people are held accountable and that we're investigating and auditing the fraud that happens than it would to just let that slide. And we need to cut the spending in the printing, the money, in the departments in our federal government that are not constitutionally accurate or not constitutionally appropriate. And when the inflation goes down and the interest goes down, we'll be able to pay more towards the debt. So it is all the circular. We need to cut spending and inflation to be able to cut our debt.
Jesse.
Thank you. So we've noticed that there's a random acts of violence that occur across the country. We've seen it right here in our own state of Wisconsin. Speaker Pelosi has no problem trying to restrict gun rights on individuals, but they never get to the why. What do you see as the why for people who will commit acts of violence on random and innocent individuals, and what is the Congress's role in trying to address those whys?
Secretary Anderson alluded to it in one of her previous questions, in that the children that end up in good schools do not end up as a high of percentage being involved in the criminal justice system. Our education system is broken, and it is hurting the ability for our kids to be productive members of society. If they, don't have the school choice, which is more of a state issue, but if they don't have the ability to go to a good school, to get a good education, to get out of the rut that sometimes these families get into, they end up going into crime. Honestly, I think that we have dehumanized a lot of things with the limited interaction that people have these days. And we need to, honestly, I think that the screen time in our schools is hurting our kids. They are in a virtual world, and that needs to be changed. And that's more of a deep answer. But think back to all the aspects of your question. The left tries to take these school shootings or these random acts of violence and use them to take away law-abiding citizens' rights to keep and bear arms. The Second Amendment is very clear that the rights of the people shall not be infringed. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment because an armed people is a safer people. We saw it in Brazil. The president there that was elected in 2019 combated and cut the regulations in Brazil where crime was rampant. And then the crime in Brasilia, the capital city there, went down by 34%. And armed people is a safer people.
Well, I can tell you exactly where this comes from. It is a symptom of the Marxist project being very far along. The Marxist project in education and in our society attack the cornerstones of our country: faith, whatever that faith might be, family, and justice. When faith is ridiculed and when people actually find themselves sometimes less likely as a second choice or a second-class citizen almost because they have a strong faith, when protesters protest against the police and are lauded for it by our media, we have a problem. When Kids see that. They learn that. They learn by what they see. When the kids see protesters, really rioters, throwing frozen water bottles and rocks at police and fighting with police, and they see violence, then they begin to somehow learn that that's okay when it's not condemned by the media and when it's not unequivocally condemned by our politicians. So our media, our educational system, all of us have to be unequivocal and strong in condemning violence, particularly in condemning political violence of any type, which I unequivocally condemn. And little by little, what we are going to see as faith is restored, as families are restored, and as our educational system starts to retool itself, to reorient itself towards fundamental American values that are in our Constitution, that are in our history, we will find these acts vanishing.
Senator Bradley.
Thank you. As you both prepare to embark on potentially a brand new role, in the private sector, a lot of times people will look for mentors or somebody for whom to try to mimic and learn from and find out, how things are working and show them the ropes, if you will. So my question is, of current elected officials, who would you be looking to mentor you and show you the ropes of Washington, D.C.? Myself excluded. I'm not in D.C.
I would unequivocally say Ron Johnson. I think that he's from here. He has represented Wisconsin well, very well, in what he does. He's been around, he's seen it inside out, and he's consistently been a very strong supporter of the truth. The truth is our strength. I don't know if all of you knew this, but before the election, Senator Johnson, in his role in the Senate, was part of a project that wrote an 80 or 90-page report on the issues surrounding Hunter Biden and the Biden family. He also wrote a lengthy report about the origins of the COVID, of the coronavirus. These are things that were true, but were unpopular, if not even dangerous to say at that time, politically dangerous. And people, I was at events, I heard people second-guessing the political wisdom of going into these dangerous areas. But he did it nonetheless. And I saw him at an event one time, and I said, "Thank you so much for doing those reports." And he looked at me and he said, "Nobody's paying attention." But I could tell that he appreciated the comments. So I think he's a man who has consistently been true to what he says. And people had, he had said that he wasn't going to run for another term. People begged him to run for another term. People came to him and they begged him to run for another term. I myself have pledged that if elected to Congress, I will serve no more than 2 terms. I am strongly for term limits. I think that people should go into government with the mind and the attitude of a servant and then go back to their normal jobs or their normal businesses.
I think 2 representatives that have stood out to me, one in the Senate, one in the House of Representatives, are Senator Marsha Blackburn and Representative Jim Jordan. And the reason that those 2 stand out to me is because they are not afraid to say what is right, to call out the wrong, and to do it in a matter-of-fact way that is just clear. They are there to represent the people of their district and fight for what is right. And that is so desperately what I hope to be able to do for the 2nd District of Wisconsin. We need more people in Washington, D.C. that don't care about the politics games, that don't care about the money, that aren't there for the fame and the glory, but are there to do a job, the job to represent the people back home, and are not afraid to step out on a limb and do what it takes to get that job done, but aren't there to get hits on Facebook or on YouTube or whatever else it might be. So Senator Blackburn and Representative Jordan are two people that I think I will look up to.
We have about 10 minutes left. Secretary Anderson.
The military has not met its recruitment goals. So military preparedness is way down. The protection of the country is one of the major responsibilities of the federal government. What would you do to bring the military back to its capabilities?
As I said before, we need a strong military presence, and Mark Pocan fights against that tooth and nail. A few weeks back, I was meeting with some business owners, and a lady from Lafayette County told me that she had to pay $600 for uniforms and supplies for her son to go overseas and potentially sacrifice his life for our country. I find that completely unacceptable. I think there would be value in auditing the Pentagon and the department. Make sure they have sufficient funds, but make sure the funds are going to where they need to be, because we need supplies, we need uniforms. Our boys and our men and women that put on that uniform and pledge to fight and defend our Constitution should not have money taken out of their first paycheck if their parents don't have it, or they don't have it, to buy the shirts on their back to go overseas and serve our military. We need to take a hard look at where the money is going, make sure we have enough. And I think, honestly, part of the reason that recruitment is down is because, again, a lot of things that I have seen tie back to education and patriotism. Why would someone that comes up through a education system that they are taught to hate our country, why would they give their life for it? We need to reinstitute patriotism and a sense of value in what America is, and get the same woke and social agenda out of the leadership of the military as we're putting in the schools, because that is not going to be a strong defense for our country. We need to get patriotism back in our schools, back in our military, make sure that we are sufficiently funded and that that funding is going to where it needs to be to make sure that our men and women are taken care of.
Well, first of all, I'd like to take a moment to thank from the bottom of my heart everybody in this room who ever served by wearing the uniform of the United States of America. So thank you all. Second, I think that is a very good question, but I'm not entirely sure that it is something that Congress can easily handle at this point in time, and I'll tell you why. First of all, it's not just the military that's having a difficult time recruiting. Almost nobody can hire anybody. And we need people, and this may come down to how do we get people back into the workforce. One thing that for sure we need to look at doing is cutting handouts that allow people to simply not join the workforce. We may need to look at some level at how else we can do this. But fundamentally, you will see people come into the military when they believe in strong leadership. And our current president has showed terrible judgment and weak leadership. We started out this year with the debacle in Afghanistan, where we withdrew in the absolutely wrong order. We left 84 billion, the number changes. I've heard 84 billion, I've heard other numbers. However many billions of dollars we left for the enemy, it was a disaster. 13 of our fine military were killed in a needless attack that didn't even have to happen if we had simply handled the withdrawal correctly. So strong people who are going to be willing to defend our country are attracted to a strong leader. And so what we need to do is get a strong leader back in the White House. We had one, we don't right now. And that's not something Congress can do, but it's something that we can all do together.
Jesse. So I don't know if either of you have been to the border before. No, I'm not talking Illinois, I'm not talking about Minnesota. But if you actually been to the border, it's actually a really sad sight to see. I've done it before. So my question to you is, what does a border security package look like to be able to secure our border?
Well, I have been to the border. I've actually traveled extensively throughout Central and South America, and I've seen what's going on there. There's a hopelessness. There's people moving around. There's also very questionable things where we see people coming that were purportedly on long trips, and we look at pictures and they obviously couldn't have been on them. There's a lot of funny stuff going on. There's people trafficking people across the border and charging them exorbitant rates. So our border is not only just a disaster and a shame for our country, but it's an endless slush fund of money for some of the most horrid criminal people on the planet. People who traffic women, people who traffic people for labor. So we absolutely have to control that border. I am not going to stand here on a stage in Madison, Wisconsin and say exactly how it would be done, but there are many places throughout the world where there are borders where people don't go back and forth across them. So it's up to Congress to provide the support that's needed, the political support that it's needed, so that our border enforcement can do its job. And if that's politically unpopular, so be it. It has to happen. On the other side of that, we also need people here. We need some level of legal immigration that isn't happening right now. And in order for that to happen, Congress, whose approval is drastically low, it's down at 16%, they have to start being adults. And they have to find a way that good, qualified people are able to come into this country and provide the types of work that our employers desperately need, but without diluting or undercutting other people's jobs. It's a complicated job, and it has to be done right, and it has to be done now, because they're killing us down there.
So I have not had the privilege to be able to go down and firsthand see the tragedy that is our southern border right now. But I was in contact with Congressman Tiffany and the Freedom Caucus to potentially be able to go and make the trip, and due to, you'll never guess what, but COVID mandates, they were having a hard time being able to get all the Congress people through because of everything that was going on. So I have not been able to see it, but I've been in contact with those who have. And it is a tragedy what is happening. We need, because not as some image, not as some line to get votes, but because the people, the border security down on the ground, dealing with the problems that are happening there, say that the wall works. We need to finish the southern border wall to be able to help us secure our nation. Our country supports immigration. It does. I can trace my lineage back to the Mayflower. I understand that this country started with immigrants. That's a good thing. But we cannot have a streamlined, efficient, effective immigration policy when we're having to constantly juggle the flood of not only immigrants from not just Mexico and Central America, but all across the world coming in through our southern border, but also the drugs that are killing our citizens, the illegal guns, the trafficking, child trafficking, labor trafficking, all of these crimes. We need to implement actual crime deterrent punishments on those that are involved in the trafficking that is happening. The slap on the wrist and go about your business mentality at the southern border is unacceptable. Without a border, we have no country.
I'm going to do a quick final question here because we are almost out of time. So everywhere I go in the state, I'll be in Green Bay tomorrow and Thursday, Wausau next Monday, a couple other places. When I tell them, when I talk to crowds and I say, I'm a Republican from Madison, you know the reaction that you get off of something like that. And I knew when Scott Walker was going to win after Act 10. I've told Kim this story and some of these folks. I was outstate, I think I was speaking at a service club or some other event, You know, we're in the middle of all these riots downtown and all these other things going on, and I spoke. There were some questions from the crowd, but not a lot of necessarily open support for Scott. It was a Democrat area. Somebody comes up to me afterwards. In fact, a couple of people came up to me afterwards and said, "Tell him to keep going. Tell him to keep going. Tell the governor to keep going." So we didn't have the open encouragement necessarily that we all would like during a campaign. And I say this with respect to radio too, because we can talk radio for hours and hours and hours and not necessarily get public support, but then go out and people say, "Oh, you know, tell Vicki she's great," or, you know, "It's good to hear you folks on the air." How do you cross that bridge in this district, which has been Democrat for a long time? How do you cross that bridge to go from Mark Pocan's been there for a while, Tammy Baldwin was there before that? How do you bring those people over and get them to the point where they're going to go, "You know what, I can support you publicly. I can go out and vote for you. I can put the sign up"? Because the bottom line, and I'm running this off some questions that others have asked to be asked, how do we get across that bridge? How do we do it?
I think people are fed up. You know, sometimes it's hard, and you get those comments saying, "Well, I'll vote for you, but I'm not going to put up a yard sign." You know, but at the same time, you also get the people that say, "It might be torn down in a day, but I'll still put it up." People are getting fed up, even here in Madison. And I think we've talked a bit about it, but you know, you mentioned Mark Pocan and Tammy Baldwin before him. We had a representative here that was a Republican back in the 90s, and I talked to him the other day, and he just said it's getting out to talk to the people. You know, walking down Main Street, poking your head into businesses and saying hello. Mark Pocan is absent in the district. I was in a parade in Wanakee on Sunday, so Dane County, and Mark Pocan wasn't even there to answer the question about the signs. We ran out of yard signs after handing out 55 in a parade in Wanakee. People are fired up and ready for something different. The bridge is built, but we need a candidate that's willing to do the work to walk over it and reach to the other side and say, "You know, I know Grandma and Grandpa voted Democrat, but Mark Pocan is not John F. Kennedy." And we need to look at policy. We need to look at results. We need to look at work ethic in our politicians, and not just name recognition, and get somebody in Washington that will represent common sense and sustainable patriotism. And the people will vote for that, and the people will support that. And like I said, I have my yard signs in Democratic yards, because even if they don't, because they're starting to see those fruits. Never before has the fruits of the far left policies been out in the open for people to see.
Well, at the beginning of the evening tonight, I said that we had to use and adhere to truth. And I've tried to say things tonight that were all entirely truthful. And you can think about that and see if there was anything that wasn't. I've also tried to say that we have to be strong. We have to adhere to our principles unyieldingly. But we also have to be kind and diplomatic and compassionate in how we present those to other people. Nobody is going to want to come to our side because they're yelled at. They're going to want to come to our side because we're reasonable, because we make sense in what we're saying, because we adhere to the fundamental values of this country that are enshrined in our Constitution, because we believe that we have a party where every single person is welcome so long as they love the United States of America and love its Constitution. People come from all over the world craving freedom, and when they get here, they're so happy to live in a place where they're free to speak their mind, happy to live in a place where they're free to practice their religion, whatever that might be. And we, as Republicans, are the ones who are standing up for that. We have to show everybody the love that we have for America and the beautiful project that we have here, and little by little they will come to our side. That's what we have to do. We may be able to do it by November. It may take till next November. We have to work as a team. We have to support each other. We have to support our statewide candidates. We have to support everybody who believes in the Constitution of the United States of America, because we can lose it. It is such a precious thing, but history has been a bloodbath. It has been an unfair place where the strong took advantage of the weak. And in this country, we have created a light of freedom. And when we keep that strong, people are attracted to strength and compassion, and they'll come to us.
How about these two candidates, everybody? Three-minute closing statements from both of you. Make the sale.
Well, it's not really a sale. I'm doing this not because it was something that I was wanting to do. I never particularly wanted to be involved in government, but I was sitting with Mr. and Mrs. Clapp, my future mother and father-in-law, after the horrible results in 2020, and we were looking at each other and we said, we all agree on these things that we're saying, but what are we going to do? What action are we going to take? And so I decided to do this. We decided, Sarah and I, we're getting married in September. She's my fiance, and we have to try. We have to try to do something to make this beautiful place last. Because it lasts from the sacrifice of all of us. Many people sacrifice their blood or their limbs fighting in faraway places where they never knew if they could go home again. They didn't know if they were going to be able to come home to their families. And they sacrificed that. So the least that somebody like me can do is offer to sacrifice a couple years and go serve. And if I'll make a promise here that I actually haven't made before, that if I am elected, I will not keep any of that salary. I will give it all to worthy charities. Not you, charity. Other charities. So if you want, you can elect me, and then you can watch a guy be poor and give all his money away. But the reality is, I don't want it. I don't want the money from the federal government. President Trump gave his whole salary away. Like the man or not, it was a beautiful thing to do, and he got no credit for it, no coverage. If it had been a different president, it would have been plastered all over the front pages of the paper. But Trump did that. Did you know he did that? He did that, and hardly anybody said thank you. He made the beautiful Abraham Accords so that there would be peace in the Middle East. And peace is there. It was a bloody place for so long, and now it's started to be peaceful. So he didn't get a lot of thanks for it. People said a lot of bad things about him. He did some great things. I realize that this is a thankless job. It will not be fun. I am offering to do it. And if I'm selected to do it, I will do it wholeheartedly with every fiber of my being, the same way you've seen me present who I am on stage tonight. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. Do as you will, and do as your faith and your faith in this country directs. And we will persist into the future as a blinding light of liberty.
Well, Eric, I'm touched. Thank you so much. This morning I was in Reedsburg visiting with a group of active patriots there. And there was a man there, and I spoke, and then we were having a time for questions. He raised his hand. He says, Charity, I met you a year ago at an event in Lime Ridge where you spoke. And I came up to you afterwards, and I said, good for you, but as a Republican in the 2nd District, you have a snowball's chance in hell to win this race. He said, but I've been watching you over the last year, and if there is a candidate that deserves to be in Congress through the work that they have put in, through the dedication that they have shown, It's you. And I was deeply touched by those words, but it is true. The truth of the matter is that I am doing this because I have seen my country hurting. I am fearful for the future of what our country will become if we continue to sit on the sidelines and not fight for her. I know this is a hard district, but I know that the people in this district are yearning for someone that actually represents them, and someone in politics that will actually listen and care. I have spent the past 15 months talking to so many people that have come behind me and supported me in this race for Congress. You know, I mentioned before, I'm from a small business background. I've never run for office before. I'm a patriot, not a politician. I know what it is to work. I know what it is to be negatively affected by the policies that Mark Pocan has put forth. I was born into Madison, Wisconsin with a Republican representative, and I believe we can do it again. I've been saying it for 15 months, and so many people have come along. State Assembly people have come along and endorsed me. Representative Kurtz and Penterman, and I think y'all are familiar with Janelle Branchin, have come alongside and endorsed me because they've seen the work that I have put in and will continue to put in. People even that don't agree with me on every single topic are excited about a candidate that will do what it takes and make the sacrifices to run the race the way we've run the race, dedicating time and energy and treasure to it, and not giving up on the almost 800,000 voters that are so often given up on in this district. We believe that we can win, and I'm doing this for you and your kids and grandkids, and the kids and grandkids I don't even have yet, because this is worth so much. Our country is worth fighting for, and we can win in District 2 if we step up and we do it together. So I'm asking for your vote on August 9th and your help to retire Mark Pocan so we can preserve our free country and have true representation in Washington, D.C.
Let's hear it for both our candidates, everybody. Let's also hear it for our great panel, Senator Bradley. And you're emceeing our Lincoln Day, I think.
I am.
Is that right?
I am.
I signed you up for it.
Thank you, sir.
Also, Secretary Anderson. And Jesse Garza. I also want to thank the mechanics for this event tonight, including our timekeeper, my longtime friend Molly Garanda. There's Navin, who's doing the video for tonight. Navin, thank you. Ty Lichty was collecting your questions tonight. Let's hear it for Ty. And where's Mike Hurl? He was doing security in case we needed any tonight. And, oh, he's out in the parking lot with someone now. So thanks to Mike Hurl.